Malcolm is a real estate consultant. Always moving, always closing deals, always chasing the next opportunity. He's good at what he does, people like him. He lights up a room when he wants to. But at home, he barely flickers. We used to laugh. We used to touch. We used to fall asleep tangled together, not just because it was comfortable, but because we wanted to feel close. Now, we share a bed, but not a life. The mornings start with silence. The evenings end with small talk. He kisses my cheek like I'm someone he used to love, like muscle memory he hasn't thought about in years. I tried to fix it. I brought up therapy once. He laughed. Said things weren't that bad. And maybe they weren't on the surface. We weren't yelling. We weren't fighting. But sometimes, silence is louder than any argument. Then there's Darian, Malcolm's son from his first marriage. 18. Quiet. Withdrawn. He spends most of his time in his room with his headphones on, sketching, painting, getting lost in things I'll never fully understand. He's not cold, just distant. Like he's been hurt before, and now he only lets people in halfway, if that. But I've seen glimpses. I've seen the warmth in him when he talks about art. The softness when he helps me carry groceries without being asked. The way his eyes linger when he's listening, not just hearing, but really listening. It's something Malcolm stopped doing a long time ago. Our house looks like something from a magazine. High ceilings, big windows, beautiful furniture. But it's cold. A house filled with footsteps, but no warmth. Some days I wander through the rooms like a ghost. Washing clothes no one thanks me for. Cooking dinners that get eaten in silence. Laying in bed beside a man who used to make me feel like the center of his world, now too distracted to even say goodnight. I stopped wearing lipstick. Stopped buying new dresses. Stopped trying. Because what's the point of being seen if no one's really looking? But Darian. He saw me. Not in the way I expected. Not in a way I even wanted at first. But when someone looks at you like you exist again, something inside you wakes up. And once it's awake, it's hard to put back to sleep. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember that because Thursdays were my self-care days, the one day of the week I carved out just for me. Malcolm never noticed, of course. But I did it anyway, booked the same spa, same time, same routine. A little escape from the noise, or rather, the silence. But that day, the spa called and canceled. Water issue, they said. So I drove back home, 20 minutes earlier than usual. Didn't think much of it. The sky was gray, the air heavy. One of those days that feels like something's waiting to happen, even if you don't know what. When I opened the front door, the house felt still. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. Malcolm was out of town, and the house should have felt calm. But there was a hum in the air. A tension I couldn't place. Then I heard it. Music. Not loud. Just a soft, low rhythm. Coming from Darian's room. Something slow, almost sensual. The kind of melody that wraps around your skin instead of your ears. At first, I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep with his music on. I walked down the hallway quietly, barefoot on the hardwood floor. I didn't mean to open the door. I really didn't. But it was already cracked open. Just an inch. Enough to see light and movement. And I looked. Just for a second. Darian was there, shirtless. His back arched slightly, hand moving rhythmically. Eyes closed. Breathing deep. And in that instant, everything slowed. My breath caught in my chest. My body froze, but my mind was racing. Not with judgment. Not even shock. Just a deep, aching realization that I shouldn't be there. I backed away, careful not to make a sound. Closed the door softly. Held the laundry basket tighter, like it could anchor me back to reality. My heart was pounding. Not out of fear. Not out of shame. But something else. Something I couldn't name. I stood in the hallway, staring at nothing, for what felt like forever. I should have left the house. Should have gone to the store, taken a walk, turned on the TV, something. But instead, I stood there, trying to breathe. I didn't tell him I saw. Didn't mention it at dinner. Didn't say a word. But something shifted that day. And it wasn't just what I saw. It was what I felt. A strange, electric kind of awareness. Not just of him, but of myself. Of what I'd been missing. Of what I'd buried. In that moment, I should have walked away emotionally too. But I didn't. Something inside me stayed. I tried to forget it. I told myself it was nothing. Just an accident. A moment. Something I wasn't supposed to see, and something he'd never know I saw. But forgetting. Forgetting isn't easy when something wakes up inside you. Especially something that's been asleep for a long, long time. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. Darian came downstairs late, still half asleep, hair tousled, hoodie half-zipped. He muttered a quiet morning, and I just nodded, my back turned to him as I stirred the eggs. I couldn't look at him, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't trust what I'd feel if I did. I kept playing it over in my head. Not the image itself, but the feeling. The stillness in his room. The slow movement. The way his face looked, free, unguarded, vulnerable. It had been so long since I saw someone that bare. Not physically, emotionally. No mask, no pretense. And it made me think. When was the last time Malcolm touched me like I mattered? Not out of habit, not out of obligation, but out of want? When was the last time I felt wanted at all? Months? Maybe a year? I honestly couldn't remember. We used to be all over each other. Now, he brushes past me like I'm a chair in the hallway. And somehow, that moment at Darian's door, that brief, accidental glimpse into his private world, it made me feel something I wasn't ready to feel. Not desire. Not at first. But noticed. Awake. I started noticing things I never paid attention to before. The way Darian carried himself. The way he always smelled faintly of cedarwood and paint. The way his eyes softened when he spoke about his sketches. And suddenly every shared space between us felt loaded. The kitchen. The hallway. The living room. I began avoiding him without meaning to. I'd walk into a room and turn right back around if I saw him there. But avoiding him didn't make it easier. It made it worse. Because when we did cross paths, even briefly, it felt like time slowed down. Like the air shifted. Like my skin was tuned to the sound of his footsteps. One afternoon, I passed him on the staircase. He was walking up. I was walking down. And our arms brushed, just for a second. But that second stayed with me the entire day. It was nothing. It was everything. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and asked myself a question I didn't want to ask. Was I really this starved for attention? That I was starting to notice my stepson in ways I shouldn't? The thought made my stomach turn. Made me feel dirty. But it didn't go away. Because this wasn't about Darian. Not really. It was about me. About the parts of me that had gone numb. The parts one thought didn't matter anymore because I was a wife, a stepmother, a woman nearing 40 who should have known better. But knowing better doesn't mean you feel better. It doesn't make the loneliness any less sharp. It doesn't silence the voice in your head that whispers at night. You're still here, but no one really sees you, do they? And now that I'd felt seen, just a little, I couldn't go back to being invisible. I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I couldn't pretend I hadn't felt it. It started small. Darian began showing up in the kitchen more often. At first, just passing through, grabbing a drink, a snack, a glance. But then, he lingered. He'd ask questions while I cooked. What's that spice? How do you make the chicken so soft? Little things. And then he started helping. He'd dice vegetables while I stirred the pot. Dry dishes while I washed. Fold laundry next to me on the couch. At first, I told myself it was innocent. Just a young man trying to connect, maybe feeling the same kind of isolation I did. But it felt different. There was something in the way he looked at me. Not like a boy. Not even like a stepson. Like someone watching me, carefully, noticing things no one else bothered to see anymore. the color of my nail polish, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was thinking, the small sigh I let out when I thought no one was listening. And I started to look back. One rainy afternoon, I came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table, sketchbook open, pencil in hand. I paused, not wanting to disturb him, but he looked up and smiled, gentle, a little shy. "Wanna see?" he asked. I nodded. He turned the sketchpad toward me. And there I was. Not a perfect likeness, but close enough to make my breath catch. My hair was looser, my eyes softer, my lips curved, like I was about to say something tender. It wasn't just a drawing. It was how he saw me, not as I was, as he imagined me to be. And in that moment, I didn't feel 39. I didn't feel tired or forgotten. I felt seen. I asked him why he chose me as a subject. He shrugged. "You just look like you're always carrying something," he said. "I guess I wanted to draw you without the weight." I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't. But something cracked open inside me. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not because of guilt. Not even because of him. Because someone noticed the weight. And someone wanted to lift it. Over the next few days, our conversations grew deeper. He asked about my childhood. I asked about his. He told me about his mom, how she left without saying goodbye. I told him about Malcolm. How he stopped saying, "I love you," without ever saying why. It felt like two people falling into each other's cracks. Like we were filling spaces that had long been hollow. Then came the night that broke whatever boundary was left. It was late. I couldn't sleep. Malcolm was away again. The thunder outside was soft but constant, like the sky was holding back tears. I went downstairs for tea and found Darian on the couch, blanket over his legs, watching something on TV. The screen flickered with dim light, an R-rated film, intimate, slow, sensual. He looked up at me, didn't flinch, didn't rush to turn it off. Just looked. I hesitated, then walked over and sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm next to mine. Not touching. Not yet. The film played. We didn't speak. Then his hand shifted, rested on the blanket between us. My hand was there too. We didn't look at each other. But slowly, his fingers moved, and mine didn't move away. They brushed. And still, I didn't move. I told myself it was a mistake, that the contact was accidental. But I didn't stop it, and neither did he. The film faded into background noise. My heartbeat grew louder than anything else in the room. When it ended, we both sat there for a moment too long. Then he stood, said good night, and walked upstairs. I didn't reply. That night, I stood outside his door for what felt like forever. Hand raised, fingers curled into a loose fist. I wasn't sure if I was going to knock. I didn't know what I would have said if he answered, or what I wanted to happen if he did. But I stood there, because something inside me already knew the line between us had blurred. And it was only going to get harder to redraw it. It was a Friday evening. Malcolm had packed his overnight bag that morning, kissed my cheek like it was a chore, and told me he'd be back Sunday night. Another business trip. Another excuse to disappear. I didn't ask questions anymore, just nodded like always. The moment the door closed behind him, the house changed. It wasn't just quiet. It was still, like it was holding its breath. I went about the day like normal. Tidied the living room. Folded laundry. Answered a few emails. But I couldn't shake the heaviness in the air. By dusk, the sky outside had gone from blue to steel gray. It matched the feeling in my chest. I was in the kitchen prepping dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. And there he was. Darian. Shirtless. A soft sheen of sweat on his skin, his hair damp like he'd just come from a shower. "Need help?" he asked, voice low. I should have said no. Should have told him to put on a shirt. Should have done 100 things differently. But I didn't. I just nodded and moved aside as he stepped up beside me. We chopped in silence. The sound of the knife hitting the board, the boiling water bubbling, my heartbeat too loud in my ears. Then he spoke. "You ever feel like no one actually sees you?" His voice wasn't casual. It was heavy, personal, like the question had been growing for a long time. I swallowed hard. "All the time," I said. He looked at me. Not the kind of glance you toss at someone when they're talking. The kind that lingers. That feels like touch. "Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared, would anyone even notice?" he said. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure I wouldn't cry if I did. He leaned against the counter, eyes locked on mine. "I notice you," I said. The words left my mouth before I could think. And he whispered back, "I notice you too." There was no music, no sudden thunderclap, just silence. And then, his hand reached out, touched my wrist. I didn't move. His thumb traced a small circle on my skin. And suddenly, I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I wasn't a wife, or a stepmother, or a woman with rules and logic and shame. I was just there, and I was wanted. I stepped closer. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just waited. And when I kissed him, it wasn't planned. It wasn't thought out. It just was. Soft, slow, then deeper, faster, urgent. There was no conversation, no decision. Just bodies moving towards something they shouldn't. We didn't go far. Just the couch. But it happened. Quick, quiet, desperate. And then it was over. We sat there, not touching, breathing heavy. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. The silence between us was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I stood up, pulled down my shirt, smoothed my hair. He looked at the floor. And I said the only thing I could think to say, "This didn't happen." Then I turned and walked away. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because some lines, once crossed, change everything. The next morning felt different. Not because the sun rose any brighter. Not because the birds sang any louder. But because everything inside me felt heavier. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. I got up early, made coffee, cleaned the kitchen, folded the same dish towel 3 times. Tried to move like nothing had happened. Darian didn't come downstairs right away. When he finally did, his steps were softer than usual. He walked past me in the kitchen without a word, without a glance. Just passed through, like I was part of the furniture. I told myself it was for the best. Distance, silence, space. It was what we needed. What we had to do. I didn't speak either. But I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He looked smaller somehow. Like a weight had been dropped onto his shoulders that he didn't know how to carry. And I knew that weight. Because it was sitting on my chest too. That evening, Malcolm came home. He walked in, dropped his overnight bag by the door, and immediately reached for his phone. "Flight was rough," he mumbled, already scrolling. "Anything happen while I was gone?" I shook my head. Smiled like everything was normal. Like I hadn't broken a sacred line less than 48 hours ago. He didn't notice. Not the tension in my shoulders. Not the silence that hung between Darian and me like smoke. Not the way my hands trembled when I set the dinner table. He didn't look at either of us. Not really. At dinner, the 3 of us sat down, our usual quiet, disconnected routine. Darian barely touched his food. I picked at mine, keeping my eyes on my plate. Malcolm scrolled through his messages. Then it happened. Darian reached for his water glass, too fast, too distracted, and knocked it over. It fell, hit the edge of the table, and shattered across the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the silence like a scream. Sharp, sudden, unforgiving. No one moved right away. Not even him. Malcolm looked up, annoyed but still half distracted. "You good?" he asked, like it was a question he didn't actually care about. Darian just nodded. "Yeah, sorry." He knelt down, quietly picking up the shards with his bare hands. I stood up and went to grab a towel, but by the time I returned, he was already gone. He disappeared into his room and shut the door. That night, the house went still again. Malcolm fell asleep watching some finance show, headphones in, oblivious to everything. But I couldn't sleep. Something was pulling me, dragging me to the hallway like a string tied around my heart. And then I heard it. Soft at first, then sharper. Crying. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, muffled sobs like someone trying hard to stay hidden even in their pain. It was coming from Darian's room. I stood in the hallway, frozen. The door was shut, the light off underneath. But the sound, it broke me, because I knew that cry. The kind of cry you let out when something inside you has snapped and you don't even know how to name it. I didn't knock, didn't speak. I just stood there, hand against the wall, tears welling up in my own eyes. And I thought, I did this. I let it happen. I let him carry something he never should have had to carry. I stood by my bedroom door, listening to the sound of a boy who had become a man too soon because of me. The days after, they didn't pass like time usually does. They dragged. Like my life was caught in thick, invisible molasses, stretching every second into something unbearable. I went through the motions. Smiled when I needed to, cooked, cleaned, answered emails. Played the part one was supposed to play. But inside, I was unraveling. At night, when Malcolm was asleep beside me, his back always turned, his breath heavy and even. I'd lie there with my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, replaying everything. Not just the moment itself, but everything that led up to it. The way Darian had started looking at me. The way I let him. The way I looked back. Was it desire? Loneliness? Was it just the ache of being seen after so long of feeling invisible? Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. I didn't even know anymore. What I did know was that I crossed a line. And not just any line. The line. The one you're not supposed to go near, let alone step over. And now it was behind me. Far behind. And there was no going back. I stood in front of the mirror that night, the bathroom light casting shadows across my face. My hair was a mess. My eyes were tired. My mouth trembled even when I wasn't speaking. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. There was shame. So much shame. But there was something else too. Something colder, darker, more dangerous. There was understanding. I understood how it happened. How someone could fall into something wrong and not stop themselves. Because they were starving. Because they were tired. Because the silence in their life had gotten so loud, they'd do anything, just to feel something again. I pressed my fingers against the sink, gripped it like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. And I asked myself a question I didn't want to answer. Did I ruin him? Did I give Darian something he thought he needed? Or did I take something from him he'll never get back? He hadn't spoken to me since that night. Not really. Just thanks when I passed him the salt. Yeah, when I asked if he needed a ride. Words, but no connection. And in a way, that hurt more than if he'd yelled at me. Because I knew what silence meant. I'd lived in it for years. Now, he was building his own version of it. And I was the reason. I thought about confessing to Malcolm. Telling him everything. Ripping off the bandage and letting the wound bleed in the open.